University Center of Tipaza. Institute of Economics, Commercial Sciences and Management Sciences. Department of Finance and Accounting. Today's topic is all about how companies fund their operations, and we will be exploring the different sources of financing available to them. Lesson objectives. By the end of this lesson, students will be able to recognize and distinguish between various sources of funding, including retained earnings, debt capital, equity capital, and other financing sources. 1. What are sources of finance? Companies always seek sources of funding to grow their business. Funding, also called financing, represents an act of contributing resources to finance a program, project, or need. Funding can be initiated for either short-term or long-term purposes. The different sources of funding include retained earnings, debt capital, equity capital, other sources such as crowdfunding. Retained earnings. Businesses aim to maximize profits by selling a product or rendering a service for a price higher than what it costs them to produce the goods. It is the most primitive source of funding for any company. After generating profits, a company decides what to do with the earned capital and how to allocate it efficiently. The retained earnings can be distributed to shareholders as dividends, or the company can reduce the number of shares outstanding by initiating a stock repurchase campaign. Alternatively, the company can invest the money into a new project, say, building a new factory, or partnering with other companies to create a joint venture. The second source of financing is debt capital. Debt capital, also known as debt financing, is a fund that a company or organization raises by borrowing from lenders or investors that must be paid with interest. Debt capital is a valuable source of funding for businesses, and it can be used for various purposes, including expansion, acquisition, and working capital. Debt financing is usually provided in the form of loans, bonds, or other types of debt securities. The investor determines the terms of the debt capital, such as the interest rate, repayment period, and collateral requirements. The third main source financing is equity capital. Equity capital is the capital collected by a company from its owners and other shareholders in exchange for a portion of ownership in the company. The company is not liable to repay the fund raised through equity financing. Equity capital is funds paid into a business by investors in exchange for common stock or preferred stock. In addition to the previous sources of financing, there are other funding sources. The other funding sources include crowdfunding, donations, and government grants and subsidies. Crowdfunding represents a process of raising funds to fulfill a certain project, or undertake a venture by obtaining small amounts of money from a large number of individuals. Donations are a common way for nonprofits and social enterprises to raise the funding they need to carry out their mission, without the pressure of generating profits. Government grants and subsidies. Grants and subsidies are examples of financing provided by government agencies to support specific projects, initiatives, or sectors that align with public policy goals. Grants commonly provide funding for research, education, environmental protection, or community development. Now let's know, what factors affect the need for sources of funding? For businesses, the most relevant factors influencing the need for funding typically include growth plans, operational needs, capital structure, that means a mix of debt and equity, research and development, R&D, asset acquisitions, that means purchasing real estate, equipment, or technology, stage of business development, economic conditions or unexpected events, like natural disasters. Dear students, before we finish today's lesson, let's quickly review the key highlights we covered. The main sources of finance are retained earnings, debt capital, and equity capital. Companies use retained earnings from business operations to expand or distribute dividends to their shareholders. Businesses raise funds by borrowing debt privately from a bank or by issuing debt securities to the public. Companies obtain equity funding by exchanging ownership rights for funds from investors. Dear students, thank you for watching. I hope this video was helpful. Please, don't hesitate to ask any questions you have.